And welcome back to the Hot Lap. We are addressing big Red Bull news here. I mean, nothing like breaking or anything, but there's a fair amount that I really wanted to talk about. So we've got the fact that Christian Horner has come out and said we can't fail in relation to their new engine project, which is quite interesting. Also, potentially an all-new Red Bull lineup when we're talking Red Bull V-Carb. Be interesting. Other than, obviously, Max Verstappen, he's definitely staying, isn't he? Brown versus Horner, the situation continues. Will it ever end? And interesting data about Sergio Perez after a Red Bull engineer ends up getting an interview, I think on Beyond the Grid or something. And yeah, interesting things coming to light about that. So, big Red Bull news. And let's start then with our first interesting thing. Is the fact that Red Bull Red Bull, as in Christian Horner, he has come out and said they cannot afford failure with their Ford-backed F1 engine plan. So, as we know, Red Bull, when they first got to the grid, they embraced a, all fun, risky, etc. approach. But they are now embracing a no-risk, no-fun approach to, at least, its new Formula One engine. And they've admitted that this is one project that can't fail. So the Milton Keynes squad, they're investing what's believed to be hundreds of millions of pounds in developing this engine for the 2026 regulations, formerly called Red Bull powertrains, and now obviously they've aligned with Ford. Now, it's going to face a huge challenge. I think everyone is under no illusion that that's going to be the case. You've got people like Mercedes, you've got Honda, Ferrari, and it needs to understand how it's going to do it, because at the moment that engine is based on the engine that Honda made. They're just improving it, adding to it, updating it. With the reliability and stuff, there are certain restrictions on how much you can update these engines. But the new Red Bull powertrains factory at Milton Keynes is very much up and running. Christian Horner's been quite happy about taking lots of Mercedes staff about their engines. Dyno work is continuing, and Ford is offering as much assistance as it can. So what we need to remember, though, that the engine has been designed very much by Red Bull, and Ford have come not quite late into the party, maybe kind of like about halfway to just over halfway through. And the scale of the investment is the biggest single investment that Red Bull have ever made in motorsport. And that's the words of Christian Horner. And he carried on saying that they can't afford for this project not to succeed. He said, I think for us strategically, where we are on our journey as a group and as a team with this alliance, this powertrain change of regulations is the perfect juncture to take everything under control with all the benefits that come from having everything on the same campus. Absolutely it does. You look at Ferrari and look at Mercedes and how successful they've been. Now, Red Bull's decision, as we said, to build its own engine was originally triggered by Honda going, see you later, and now they're going, we're going to come back. They had, though, and this project, if you remember a few years back, currently with obviously Ford, but originally it looked like it was going to be the German manufacturer Porsche that was going to align with them. It didn't, and then that opened the door for Ford, the Blue Oval, coming back on an F1 car in 2026. The last time we saw Ford would have been, other than in the guise of Jaguar from 2000 to 2004, would have been on the Stewart Formula One team. That ended in 1999 when they turned to Jaguar. But Ford's input for the project has evolved over time, and it's certainly not the case of Red Bull and its partner looking after specific elements of the power unit. But Red Bull still had a massive say before Ford came on. We cannot forget that, because these engines are designed, sometimes years in advance. But instead, Horner and Ford's global motorsports director, Mark Rushbrook, awesome name, have explained that the working relationship is one that constantly evolves to help best allow them to have progress together. And Horner said it's very dynamic with certain requests at obviously certain times, as we're very much in the building phase. Where we didn't have resource and capacity, he said it was okay. We need simulation engineers, we need electrical engineers. That's where these guys, and he's talking about Ford, through their motorsport activities, as you know, they, for example, they're in rally at the moment, and through the investment that they've made in EV, it was just logical for us to start there and say, okay, share with us your experiences. And Rushbrook said that from Ford's perspective, there were no red lines in terms of what it had to get involved in. He said even in the first discussions, it wasn't a we want to put X number of people on site. It was let's figure out where the contribution can be and what the benefit is going to be. Then we're very dynamic, but reacting as we needed to have the right resources. And essentially what Horner says, as I said at the beginning of the story, is they cannot afford to fail simply because the amount of investment in there. I guess the other reason they can't afford to fail, because if that engine is not particularly good, Max Verstappen is still with them for the 2026 season, he may well be gone if they have a very damp squib of an engine. They have had in the past a very unsolid engine, let's say, and that was, for example, when the regulations changed, they've always had Renault engines, didn't they, up until their Honda engine. And it was their Renault engines, they suggested that was letting them down. But this time around, they don't have what they had last time, was an Adrian Newey. That almost made up the difference. And towards the end of the season, Red Bull started getting victories. It got very close. And then at the beginning of the season, again, it got a bit further away from them and they caught up again towards the end of the season. For example, they've won, Max Verstappen's constantly won the Mexican Grand Prix a few times, but the Brazilian Grand Prix a couple of times towards the end of the season, or nearly winning it as well at one point, had it not been for his whoops-a-daisy with Esteban Ocon. So, I'm just going to take a drink. That's what's quite interesting. Let's get into the next story about this potential all-new Red Bull lineup. So, Red Bull's junior team VCARB could field an all-new lineup of Liam Lawson and Isaac Hadjar for the 2025 season. And that has been claimed. What happened to Yuki Tsunoda? Well, he could potentially be promoted to Red Bull as Sergio Perez's replacement. And Red Bull reportedly are keen to find a new home for 2025 for Daniel Ricciardo. But where would that be? So Perez, as we know, this has kind of all stemmed from Sergio Perez's averageness at the moment. People believe he's got 2 races left to turn it around. Let's hope he does. But as we know, Perez signed a 2-year deal last month, just before the Canadian Grand Prix. The expectation that Red Bull is growing, that Red Bull could or will, depending who you believe, drop the Mexican in the near future if he is unable to arrest his poor form. There was a lot of talk last year about that, but it didn't happen. So take that what you will. But PlanetF1.com, they've reported over the recent British Grand Prix weekend that Perez could be replaced during this year's campaign with performance clauses being revised in this new contract if they see fit. Long-serving Red Bull advisor Mr. Helmut Marko, yes, he never keeps his cards close to his chest, does he? But he's revealed recently that the firm's shareholders are keen to see the VCARB team return to its Toro Rosso roots to bring in young talent. So they're no longer their own team, like they said. They've kind of done a massive U-turn as to what they were at the beginning of the season, but, it's their team, they're allowed. So a report by German publication Automotor and Sport has claimed VCARB could have 2 new drivers for 2025, even though Tsunoda is signed with them. The contract of the Red Bull affiliated drivers have long contained a mechanism, or clauses if you will, to allow the companies to switch them freely between Red Bull and VCARB. Oh, the Racing Bulls or RB, whatever you want to call them. But the most memorable example occurring in 2016 when, yes, Mr. Max Verstappen swapped seats with Danny Kvyat, and he didn't do too bad, did he? So it's claimed that Red Bull could employ a similar tactic with Tsunoda, rewarding the Japanese driver, finally rewarding him, getting the notification that a lot of people have been saying, with a team in place of Perez, who's just scored 1-5, that's 15 points in the last 6 races in arguably the first or second fastest car. Not good enough, is it? Not all of it has been his fault, but most of it has. But that would allow VCARB to promote Lawson, who impressed in what was a 5-race cameo with VCARB, then AlphaTauri last year, and when Danny Ricciardo hurt his hand, for the injured Ricciardo. And that was mid-2023. Marko revealed earlier this year that the clause in Lawson's contract would allow the 22-year-old to walk away from Red Bull entirely if he's not promoted to a seat. Now, the interesting thing is, though, where could Lawson go? Potentially Williams, potentially Haas are, kind of realistic options. Maybe even the Sauber Audi team. But he's not really, I imagine, the reason he's not being spoken about in those guys, because everyone assumes at some point he's going to stay with Red Bull. Maybe that still would be the better option. But a promotion for Lawson may not be the last of the Red Bull driver changes, because Hadjar, who is leading the F2 Championship and who drove Perez's car in the opening practice of the British Grand Prix, was supposedly in contention to replace Ricciardo, who has, as you know, largely... People have said he struggled since returning to F1 a year ago. I don't think he struggled. I just want to say disappointed. It's claimed that Red Bull team boss Christian Horner, a personal friend of Daniel Ricciardo, is keen to retain him. But Red Bull, the larger company, are trying to convince other teams to sign him. Yeah, good luck with that. Sign our driver that we don't deem good enough for our B team. Yeah. Audi, who will take over the existing Sauber team and F1 entries overseen by Seidel, the team principal of McLaren's Ricciardo's contract. It was ended prematurely, and it was Seidel that did it. They've shown little interest of signing Ricciardo. Where could he go? If Red Bull, though, are ultimately successful in... The article here says offloading, which is a bit cruel, Ricciardo, should they wish to do. It said that Hadjar would step up to partner Lawson. That would be very Toro Rosso, wouldn't it? But speaking to the media at the recent Austrian Grand Prix, Ricciardo insisted that there's no concerns. He said, no, I don't want to be casual about it because obviously I care a lot, but I don't know. Maybe I'm at a point where it's like, what will be, and I'm just going to put everything on the table in an effort, essentially go maximum attack. He kind of said that before the British Grand Prix as well, so fingers crossed there. So we go on to Brown versus Horner. Brown has pretty much said that Red Bull turmoil will only have a longer term impact on the team. He doesn't think Red Bull's performances have been dented by its unrest yet, but reckons it could soon change. And Christian Horner's obviously completely denying it. They kind of started a war of words. When you look at it, as late back as 2022, when we had the cost cap, when Zach Brown came out, either bravely or sillily, depending on, I guess, what team you support, and suggested strongly that Red Bull were cheats for breaching the 2021 cost cap. Where they did breach it, they were found breaching it. Were they cheats? I guess in one way you could argue they were cheats, but then Christian Horner did come out after denying that they'd done it, obviously. I think his exact words were, we submitted below the level. So that kind of is a denial, but he wasn't flat denying it, which was interesting. But Christian Horner just saw it as just a mistake. So I guess believe who you want. I don't think it was done on purpose. But Zach Brown doesn't believe Red Bull have been too affected, he said, but by behind-the-scenes turmoil at the Formula One just yet. Red Bull, as you know, they've been embroiled in what this power struggle was ever since long-time owner Dietrich passed away in 2022. And there's been a deepening rift between Christian Horner, who, as has been said a lot, enjoys the backing of the Thai half of the Red Bull, and the Austrian camp with Oliver Mintzlaff and Helmut Marko, Alain Jos and Max Verstappen as well. And the tensions ended up spinning out into the open at the start of the year with the WhatsApp, etc., the female grievance. It was just, whoops-a-daisy. And Verstappen's father has made more than one call for Christian Horner to leave, saying it's just going to get worse. But now Zach Brown had been in the mix of the last month, and he's one of the people in the paddock who's clamouring for more transparency over the Horner investigation. Yes, I think when you are a global company, a global sport, yes, I think that's really important. But Brown doesn't believe that Red Bull's been too affected by its power struggles just yet. He's expecting this inner turmoil to potentially be a factor as teams gear up for the 2026 regulations, a couple of years away. He said himself, I think the turmoil will have more of a mid to longer term impact. He said, Adrian Newey, this car was done last year. What they are racing now was done, everything has been fine. He said it's more 26 when you've got a new engine coming, what's going on with the driver front. That's where you potentially are going to see the lack of stability that appears to be there coming through a little bit. He said winning holds things together, and that becomes more of a challenge for them. I mean, I guess he's right there. You can potentially just look at Mercedes. That's where you might see them from fractures in various relationships inside that camp. But with all F1 teams facing plenty of unknowns ahead of the 2026 season, with both the chassis and power unit regulations, they're undergoing sweeping changes. Brown is obviously aware that 2025 may well be McLaren's best opportunity so far to challenge for that championship, just when you look at how good they're doing now. And he said, I think next year could be an epic season, right? You have 4 teams fighting for the championship while also acknowledging the likes of Aston Martin, and even Racing Bulls could join the fray. So it would be naive to rule out someone who's not on the top 4 right now, because we do see how quickly things can change. I mean, just look how good McLaren have done. And he said everyone has similar technology, so there's no reason why others can't do what we've done last year. Now, next year's cars are going to basically be a heavily updated version of this year's, I'd imagine, because everyone's going to be concentrating on those 2026 regulations. So this Brown versus Horner thing, I don't think we're going to get any unrelenting of it. I mean, it reignited again at the Austrian Grand Prix with Lando Norris versus Max Verstappen with Horner and Stella, but with Horner defending Max Verstappen, Stella basically saying the whole world saw what Max Verstappen did. Zach Brown doubling down on that, saying, suggesting that when Red Bull told Max Verstappen over the radio, that kind of intimated that it was Lando's fault, not his, saying that no, that's not right at all. And you need to hold your drivers to account, saying that they hold their drivers to account. It'll be interesting to see if one of their drivers does a mistake, whether they do now, he has said that, hold their drivers to account. It'll be interesting. So anyway, that's pretty much it between Zach Brown and Christian Horner. I don't think we've seen the end of it. I don't think we've seen the end of the whole WhatsApp female grievance either, because as you know, she's appealed to the FIA and she has appealed and complained, to the FIA. So more on that, maybe. No idea when. Let's talk about Sergio Perez then. Finally, last but not least. But a Red Bull staff member has suggested that he may well be most upset after there's been some leaked data. So even if Sergio Perez may be most upset with his claim, Red Bull chief engineer, during an interview, Paul Monahan, he explained that marginal gains make up half a second a lap per difference between Perez and Max. Have we finally now seen the difference between a good driver and a great driver? But then how great is Sergio Perez if he's half a second behind Max Verstappen? Because the other drivers are close to each other. George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris. So Perez, he's been Verstappen's teammate since 2021, through all of Verstappen's title-winning years so far, and at no point managing to mount a challenge. He had mounted challenge in a few races, but that's about it. And he's been facing, as you are probably aware, as we've said in this very video, scrutiny in recent months. And he's now 137 points behind Max Verstappen. Now, speaking on the Beyond the Grid podcast, Monahan said, I feel he felt it's not a controversial statement to say that Verstappen is the quicker of the two Red Bull drivers. Granted. He said it's an opinion and data breakdown which Monahan knows may not sit too well with Perez. He said, I wouldn't want to be rude to Checo, and he may well bite my head off if he was sat here. But I'll say in general, Max is a little quicker than Checo. He said, for me, it's not a controversial statement. Bear with me a second. I've just lost where I'm ready. He said, for me, it's not a controversial statement, he said. Checo may well be most upset with me. Half a second on average. He said, let's say most circuits have 20 corners. Look at that as an increment per corner. It's a minute, the difference per corner. Maybe he pulls half a tenth in one corner, it borders on trivial, yet it adds up throughout the lap, just to get a little bit more. He said Max gets to the limit and stays that little bit closer to it, and doesn't massively overstep in qualifying when you overdrive the thing. If that's the difference, and the average comes out at a number at the end, if that's the objective measurement, so be it. I think there's a little bit more to it perhaps, but he's pretty good, isn't he, when he's talking about Max? He does believe that Perez succeeds in keeping Verstappen honest, okay, as his teammate, arguing the driver that Perez replaced, Alex Albon, did the same at times. I would argue now, I think that Alex Albon would potentially do a better job than Perez, but these are all ifs and buts. He said he's a phenomenal talent when talking about Max, no doubt about it. And I wouldn't say in a detrimental way to Checo, because he keeps Max honest. And he mentioned, obviously, Alex would as well, but Max tends to put himself in a situation where he gets what he wants out of a race. Zandvoort last year, wet, dry, who comes out 1 and 2? Max and Fernando. Everybody else in the walls and gravel and all sorts. And those two emerge. Verstappen currently leads the 2024 Drivers' Championship by 84 points over McLaren's Lando Norris, as he bids to match Vettel's streak of 4 successive titles in Red Bull colours. I think he probably will. Next year is going to be really interesting, but the big question is, will Sergio Perez be there? Yeah, that's very much the big question mark. If you liked what you see, please give us a subscribe. That would be great if you're not already subscribed, to get F1 news. We do a bit of gaming, rally news. The touring car will be starting again in a couple of weeks, which is good really, because that's when F1 takes a break. And also, we've went to Goodwood on Saturday. We've got a few videos about Goodwood too. So I will leave you to it. We'll speak to you soon, and thank you very much.